had for her, and it was for Mary, and it seemed very inadequate to what, what we are looking forward to today.
We don't know that.
As we all know, in the early morning of April 19th, 1775, British troops marched from Boston and gathered about 14 miles northwest on Lexington's Town Green. Witnesses remembered some British officers yelled, "Throw down your arms, you villains, ye rebels," and a shot was heard among the chaos. No one knows for certain who fired the first shot, but the ensuing battle turned so fierce that the area reeked of burning powder. By day's end, some 250 British and 95 colonists were killed or wounded. Thus began the American Revolutionary War that lasted more than 8 years. Citizens living in these colonies took on a mix of loyalties, and today we hear from Mary Wheat, Forsyth County Genealogical Society board member, who will discuss her family's Loyalists, American colonists who supported the British cause during the American Revolution, and their fate following the American victory. So please, give us a round of applause for Mary Wheat.
Thank you. It was very kind, and thank you all for coming. And I'm sorry, but I'm not going to stand up. So tell me if you can you hear me? And is everything okay? All right, cool. Well, basically, the glasses have to go on now, I'm sorry. But you've done a really good job. I went ahead and took about several other ideas, and you're going to see pictures of what I did instead of the shot that was heard around the world and started the war, because there were some other things actually before that led up to some of it, and people got very angry, and lots of tempers are involved here, and in many ways it was a civil war between the Loyalists and the Patriots. And in case you all don't know, and I'm sure you do, Patriots were the ones who favored our country being free, and the Loyalists were the ones who favored England and the fact that they wanted the English to still help rule. So, you know, we all know what happened, but basically, one of the major problems here was the taxation without representation. And so it started before the shots, the fact that people were so angry that they had these horrible taxes, and they had no say in the government. So that was part of the problems. And so I'm going to talk about several other reasons, and then I'm going to talk about some, well, Patriot and Loyalist leaders, but we all know the Patriot leaders. I will talk about some Loyalist leaders, and then I have several stories to talk about my family members of how they handled this and what they did. So basically, Kathy gave me really good instructions. We'll see. Okay. The first one was the Stamp Act. And this is one of the things that people got so angry about. It happened in 1765. And the British, okay, I'm going to have some trouble. The British law that imposed a direct tax for the colonies. And the idea was anything that was published had to have a seal on it. And that seal had to come from London. And so it obviously cost money. And so that was the biggest problem, that anything that was printed, such as a will or any kind of legal document, any kind of playing cards, which is one that amused me, the playing cards, anything like that, that all had to have taxes. And they were taxed, and this just, made people irate, to say the least. Oops. Sorry, Kathy. All right. See, I'm back. The Boston Massacre, that's right. I was thinking that I skipped one. And this is the Boston Massacre of 1770. And I should have brought the papers, because then I could read it better. I think I have it. Excuse me for a second. I didn't know I was going to have so much trouble reading it. Escalating conflict due to the British troops in the city. They were enforcing unpopular laws. That was the problem. It wasn't the fact that they were just sitting there being real nice, but they were enforcing things that just really caused the colonists to be irate. And on March 5th, 1770, riotous colonists gathered outside the customs house. And if you've been in Boston, why the customs house is still there. It's a big place. And more violence led to soldiers firing into the crowd of the colonists and killing 5 people. And the next one, and I hope you can see somewhat you can see the picture. This is my favorite one, the Boston Tea Party. And every child has heard of the Boston Tea Party, all the tea going in the ocean. But this happened in December 1773. Approximately 342 chests of tea containing over 92,000 pounds, about 46 tons of tea, were dumped into the Boston harbor. Can't you just imagine how it smelled? Anyway, very nice maybe. This was valued at approximately $1.7 million in today's currency. This conflict was known as the Civil War. The American colonists were divided. Patriots, as I already mentioned earlier, and wanting to get rid of the British rule altogether. The Loyalists not wanting to have a revolution, and they were loyal to the crown. Many of them had jobs that were dependent on the crown. And they may have been, well, I went ahead and said they may have been employed by the British government as soldiers, tax collectors, etc. And I hadn't known this, nearly 1/5 of the colonists were Loyalists, especially in the beginning. And these are notable individuals. And the first ones were the Patriots, and these are all ones that we know. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Hancock, Benjamin Franklin. And so I'm not going to talk about those. But the ones that I do want to mention are some of the Loyalists. And the first one is William Franklin. And William Franklin was the illegitimate son of Ben Franklin. Again, didn't know that. So they had a good relationship, and they did things together, but they differed over the future of their country. And Ben wanted, of course, freedom. William wanted to have lessening of the controls of the British government, but he wanted it to be slow and not to have a revolution. So eventually, he went back to England and never reconciled with his father. Another one was Thomas Hutchinson. And Thomas had been from a very prominent family in the Boston area. And he actually had been governor for a while. And he, again, wanted slow and to keep contact and some control with the British government. And eventually he had to leave and went back to England. you're going to notice a theme here. If you have money, you go back to England. If you don't have money, you go elsewhere. So, probably the saddest story is John Malcolm. Well, John was very bright. John seized a Sons of Liberty ship in Maine, and he was caught and tarred and feathered, not once, but twice. And so he scooted out of the country and didn't come back. He stayed in England. Joseph Grant was interesting because he was the leader of the Loyalist Indians, and he also advocated to be able to get along and to still have some British rule. But at the end of the war, when he saw that obviously that wasn't it, but he stayed in the country and he worked to try to get the governments to preserve some of the Indian lands. And the last one was Boston King. And Boston King was a person who, he was part of the Black Loyalists, and he became a leader there. And when the war started, they went ahead and talked to many of the blacks and tried to enslave people, and told them that they would get their freedom for them if they would help them. And so many risked their lives to go behind the military zones, and went ahead and they fought hard and risked their lives. And Britain kept their word, gave them certificates of freedom at the end of the war. And so many of them went up to Nova Scotia, and they had a colony there, but there was a lot of starvation, a lot of violence, but finally they were able to settle into a community, and Boston King was one of their leaders. Eventually he went to England and got an education and wrote his memoirs, and said that was an interesting, good outcome for Boston, for Reverend King, as he would be. Now, as I promised you, as long as I can see where I'm going here. This is I'm going to talk about 4 families. 3 of them are directly related, and I will show you, since we're all genealogists, I will show you my family trees. But the 4th family was just involved very much in a story that I will tell you. Some of you have heard it. But the first family that I'm going to talk about are the Knowltons. And Mr. Knowlton and his family were the first British to come over to Nova Scotia. And it didn't work out well. Mr. Knowlton died almost immediately after he got to Nova Scotia. And his wife and his children went down to New England. And they moved the Knowltons in general moved between Connecticut and Nova Scotia. And one of the ones that most was well known was Daniel Knowlton, and he was a soldier and he did very well. There was the governor of Nova Scotia and the governor of Massachusetts wanted to have people get together, and they wanted to have a troop force that would be the best along the western hemisphere, not the hemisphere, but western coast. And so Connecticut had, I've got to get the right number, way back. I've just been talking. Okay, the governor of Nova Scotia and the governor of Massachusetts called for a volunteer force to be the strongest force on the coast of the western continent. Connecticut, this is what I wanted in numbers. Connecticut furnished 516 men, including the 19-year-old Daniel Knowlton. He served in the regiment of Colonel Joseph Scott. They were victorious. Daniel moved back and forth between Nova Scotia and New England. He married Mrs. Zeruiah Watkins, by whom he had, and this is a quote from some of the papers I had, they had an interesting family of boys and girls. I don't know what that meant. After moving to Nova Scotia the first time, or the last time, his wife died, and he had many trials and tribulations. He married Mrs. Mary, the widow of Colonel Joseph Scott, later on, and he prospered and held, and this was interesting, the office of moderator. And when I looked it up, it sounds like it was like a judge or something like that. And the Knowlton name was well known in Nova Scotia. Now, I was shown, and hopefully I can do this. Yes, that is the family tree that has the Knowltons. And so you've got Daniel Knowlton, Mary, Miss Zeruiah Watkins. And they had many children, and one of them was Esther Knowlton. So this is certainly not a complete family tree. What it is complete, just taken out so you can see the people that I'm going to talk about. And they just happen to all be together. And they all came from Nova Scotia. Kind of a pattern there, right? So, okay. The next story I like for different reasons, but this is about Gemma Spear Marsh, and she and her family live in Braintree, Massachusetts, and they're going to be moving, and so you'll hear the story about how they're going to be moving. It simply talks about when she was born, when she married Samuel Marsh, her husband, and then when she died in Nova Scotia. And I'm going to read to you. This is a diary entry that she had, or a journal entry. And, okay, it's a story written as a journal entry. So you can gather that maybe Gemma didn't really write it. But anyway, the time has come for us to leave home here in Braintree, Massachusetts. It is a lovely little New England village of about 700 people. Our families live here. This is where my husband and I grew up, married, and had our children. We are going to Economy, Nova Scotia. That's in Canada. It's around 5,000 people, many of whom are Loyalists like we are. It is on the Bay of Fundy. The Bay of Fundy, what in the world? The Bay of Fundy, which has absolutely enormous tidal waves. It will take us about a week by ship to get there from Boston. We're going to a brand new country. It will be so hard, so many changes. But there are friends and relatives there, so that will make it easier. Wait for this. We have 10 children. Samuel is 22, Joshua is 20, Elijah is 18, Jeremiah is 16, Nathaniel 14, Isabel 13, Henry 10, Jonathan 8, James 5, and Josephus 2. I heard some of the children crying in the night last night. My husband is sergeant in the Army of the King George. It is getting to be really dangerous here in Braintree. The other day, a Patriot yelled, and remember Tory is another word another word that they use. Tory, go home. And he tried to stab him with a knife. We know that we have no choice but to move from Braintree because it's too dangerous for us and for our children. But moving is so hard to do. All right. And I get to play with your wonderful clicker. All right. And these are the Marshes, Samuel and Gemma. And they had Henry, and I mentioned Henry in the list, but at that time he was only 10. And so now he's grown, and he is marrying Esther Knowlton. So, again, that would be my great-grandparents. And in Massachusetts, this is Braintree, and you can see Boston up here. I may have not made that right. Okay, well, anyway, Boston's up there, north. So Braintree is south of Boston. And at that time, remember, they only had 800. They certainly have more people now. And interesting enough, I've not actually been to Braintree. I would have been there if I had known about all this and where they came from. As I pointed out to someone else, when we lived there, we lived straight out Route 9, clear out off the map, because we lived between Worcester and Boston. The next one is to show where they're moving to economy. And again, because of the wonderful arrows, you can see where economy is. And I probably don't need to do anything else since I can't get this to work right now. But that's economy. And there's, in today's map, there's a lower and upper economy. At that time, there was just one economy. And so, and it's on the Bay of Fundy. And the next one is going to show, okay, that's the Bay of Fundy, and where it goes, you can go straight in. There's the one where you go straight from Boston up into Nova Scotia. So that was what they were going to be on the ship to do. Okay. I mentioned that there was a family that I wasn't actually related to that I was going to talk about because of the intertwining and the involvement with another family. I have many, many Lewis relatives clear further way back beyond this, but this Caleb Lewis I'm going to mention, I could not find a direct linkage. I'm sure there is somewhere, but I didn't find it. So I'm just going to talk about Caleb and the Lewis families in general. And then we'll go on from there. The Lewis families and the Fordyces were intertwined both by marriage and later on they're intertwined by marriage, definitely. There were some earlier Lewises too. And they moved back and forth between Canada and Connecticut. The first Lewis known was William, and he was born in 1564 in Wales. He came to the U.S. and then went back to England, and they had moved back and forth. By 1636, the family included his son William, and he came to the head of the Charles River, which was later known as Boston. They joined, some of them joined the Reverend, and the name is really strange, so I'm going to say it's Hooers, Reverend Hooers, and they set up to settle the city of Hartford, Connecticut. And they had, from the governor of Connecticut, they had documentation to do this. Well, once Mr. Lewis passed away, the governor decided to take away that charter. And so he corralled them all these people all into a church and wouldn't let anyone out until he got the charter. Well, there was a really devout man who took the charter and passed it out through a window. And it was hidden in a hollow oak and it was later known as the Charter Oak. So they went ahead, and obviously Hartford, Connecticut was born, one way to say it. Oh, I'm way ahead of work. Okay. Anyway, William Lewis was born in England, and then he came back and forth to the colonies. And he became part of a military company and did very well with that. And he and his wife had 16 children. And the 8th child was Ebenezer. He and his wife also had 16 children. Caleb was the son of Dr. Lewis, and he was born on May 22nd, 1736, in Wallington, Connecticut. He became a Loyalist, and his wife died. His children, and this is, I've got all this because it's typical of what happened to many Loyalists, especially at the end of the war. That Caleb, well, his wife died, but the biggest thing is that his property was confiscated. Many bad things happened, and then his children scattered, and he was thrown in prison. He later escaped, got together with John Fordyce, and they escaped to Nova Scotia and stayed basically hidden until the end of the war, when they went back to try to get their families back. Oops, sorry. This is where I was talking about in Richmond, Rhode Island. And this is where some of these families were. And so again, there's an arrow so you can see where that is. And the last of the stories, and the last of the discussing the families, is John Fordyce. And we've got when he was born, his marriage with Elizabeth Stanton. It's very important. And then he died actually up in Quebec. He went to Nova Scotia several times, but then he ended up in Quebec. So the story goes that John Fordyce was a known Loyalist, and he was married to Elizabeth Stanton. And he had, he knew that people were after him. He was a wanted man. And so he went outside and escaped, and hid and went up to Nova Scotia. It does not say whether he crossed over the New York line or how he got to Nova Scotia. But he and Caleb Lewis did get up to Nova Scotia and stayed up there. When the war ended, they came back to reclaim their families. Well, John Fordyce's wife, Elizabeth, was married again because he'd been gone so long that everyone assumed he was dead. So she found they reunited. And I'm going to read exactly what they said because it's just, to me, it's fascinating that it was written this way. That the rebellion was settled and they went back to their families. Elizabeth was supposed to be a widow on account of his long absence. She had married Mr. Porter and had 2 children, Anna and a son who died very young. At his return, John Fordyce conferenced with Porter and agreed mutually to let Elizabeth choose which husband she would live with, whereupon she chose John Fordyce and moved to Nova Scotia with him.
Oh, goodness.
There is another story, another version of this story that was scribbled in one of these books, and it was scribbled by one of his grandsons. Another version of the story of John Fordyce's disappearance was that he went out of the house to get an armful of wood. He became frightened at some movements he heard in the vicinity, and he skulked away into the dense woods. He made his way to Nova Scotia and remained there in seclusion until the war was over. Being somewhat of a wag, he returned with an armful of wood when he entered the house.
All right.
They had 9 children, and this is important to me because they had Stanton. And Stanton was my 3rd great-grandfather. Stanton is right down there. I'm having trouble. We won't do I didn't mean to do that. But anyway, Stanton married a Marsh. And so, again, you can tell the group was kind of all together there. And they did move around, and the next generation, you can see from all the things that are written, and following generations went back to the United States. And so it's just interesting because these people had very definite convictions, and they followed what they thought was best for them and their families. And it's not that much different than what various people do now. But it's been interesting for me to go through and to do this. I knew somewhat about this when we visited Nova Scotia. And we did that just because it was going to be a neat trip. But we didn't realize that, and I did vaguely know about some relatives, but I promised my husband that we would not do genealogy. This would just be a trip. I was there less than a half a day before I knew where the genealogy library was and the hours, and made arrangements to go.
Oh, good. Good for you.
So one of the things that's interesting is the last one, Stanton Fordyce, was born in Parisboro, Nova Scotia. All the paperwork that I have, not this that I've reprinted, but the original paperwork, all stamped Parisburg, Nova Scotia, because that's where the genealogy library was. So it's been a fun journey. I protested, but thank you, because it was a good journey, and it's helped me get back to genealogy, so that's very important to me. So I thank you. If you have any questions.
Have you connected with any of your relatives in Nova Scotia as far as getting to know any of them?
No, I have relatives in another part of Canada that we had a long time ago, but not these.
Okay.
But it was just interesting as I'd go along the Bay of Fundy. People really lived there, because the tidal waves are so, as I used in this
Oh,
journal, but so immense. And it's just, it's a really beautiful country. If you've not had the opportunity, it's worth a trip. We flew into Portland and actually drove up. But it was some years ago, but it was good. Anything else? Yes?
So when the family left Nova Scotia to come back, where did they settle?
Some of them settled in New York. Some actually settled, some of my family that ended up in Iowa settled in Illinois and then went on to Iowa. And that's where my whole family was from, was Iowa. This is all my paternal side of, this is my paternal side of the family, or a good share of it. My mother's side of the family was all stayed in New York until they came down to Iowa.
so were you born and raised in Iowa?
Yes,
Okay.
country girl. The only thing that was different is I lived in a small town, but all my relatives lived in country, so.
Okay.
Anything? Oh, yes.
So did you also have some Patriot ancestors as well? that were there?
Yes. I certainly do. I don't want you to think that I just have these in fact, I'm actually thinking about doing the DAR bit. I'm certainly eligible. I grew up knowing I was eligible from one side of the family, but they never left me the paperwork. They kept saying, "Mary, you know you're eligible. You can join the DAR anytime you want." Paperwork? No. But thank you, Cindy.
Just want to make sure you have both sides.
When she and I talked about this earlier, why I said, yeah, I need to tell people that I really am eligible for the DAR. I really do have these good ancestors, these patriots.
You had equal representation.
Absolutely.
Was it your mother's family that were the Patriots and your father the Loyalists? Or
No.
a mixture?
That wasn't really it, because there was a lot of relatives on my father's side of the family that were patriots. And I don't know if there were any loyalists. They all lived in New York, and there were a lot of loyalists that lived in New York. So my mother's family very well could have had, and that's something I'm going to try to investigate. They could have had loyalists. But I know that they had some patriots. And then in my father's family, there's people in Pennsylvania, people in Massachusetts, and in Connecticut, all were patriots. So but it'll be interesting to try to find them. And this, I know I've got quite a lot of information on the patriots of my father's family. And one, do you remember, Cindy, when we actually found the tune or the song of one of the Army things, and you were singing it?
Oh.
You don't remember, but it was, anyway. I definitely have some information about my mother's side of the family and being in the Army. Okay, anything else?
Mary, thank you. This has been so interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kathy, for letting me use your computer.
Oh, yes, you're welcome.
Someday I may buy my own.
We do appreciate it so very much.